The summer heat in Atlanta pressed down on Magnolia Street like a heavy blanket, but inside the small brick house with the peeling white shutters, 73-year-old Martha Washington was preparing Sunday dinner as she had every week for the past 45 years. Before we begin, tell me something about where you live. What's the weather like today? Her weathered hands, spotted with age but still steady from decades of cooking, carefully seasoned the collard greens while cornbread baked golden in the oven. The aroma filled every corner of their modest home, mixing with the scent of fresh flowers Martha had picked from her small garden that morning. "Willie, you better come wash up," she called to her husband, who sat in his worn leather recliner, the one they'd bought second-hand 30 years ago, but had become his throne. At 75, Willie Washington moved slower than he used to, his knees creaking from years of working construction, but his smile still lit up the room whenever he looked at his beloved Martha. They had built a life together from nothing, raising 4 children in this very house, stretching every dollar, sacrificing their own needs so their babies could have better. "Smells like heaven in here, honey," Willie said, making his way to the kitchen table that Martha had already set with their good china, the set they'd received as a wedding gift from Martha's grandmother, one of the few precious things they owned. Every Sunday, Martha insisted on using the good plates, saying, "We work too hard to save the nice things for special occasions that might never come." Martha smiled, adjusting Willie's collar tenderly. "I made extra, hoping maybe one of the children might surprise us." Her voice carried hope tinged with resignation. It had been 3 months since any of their 4 children had visited, and 6 months since they'd all been together around this table. Their eldest, Marcus, lived just 20 minutes away in a sprawling suburban house with his wife and 2 teenage daughters. He ran a successful accounting firm and drove a BMW that cost more than his parents had made in several years combined. When he did call, which wasn't often, he always seemed rushed, distracted by clients and golf tournaments and school events that somehow never included his parents. "Dad, we're just so busy," Marcus would say. "The girls have soccer and debate team, and Linda's involved in the charity auxiliary. You understand, right?" Their second child, Denise, had moved to Chicago for her law career 15 years ago. She lived in a high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, a far cry from the cramped bedroom she'd shared with her sister growing up. When she called, it was usually to complain about work stress or her latest relationship drama, rarely asking how her parents were managing on their fixed income. "Mom, you wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under," Denise would sigh. "Partnership decisions are being made, and I can't afford any distractions right now." Their third child, Jerome, lived in Los Angeles, chasing dreams of making it in the music industry. At 38, he still believed his big break was just around the corner, too focused on recording demos and networking at clubs to remember his parents' birthdays. When he did reach out, it was usually because he needed money. "Just a little loan, Pop," Jerome would say. "I got this opportunity, and if you could just help me out this once." Their youngest, Keisha, lived closest to home, but might as well have been on another planet. At 32, she was consumed with her own family, twin boys and a husband who worked long hours. She lived in constant chaos, always running from one activity to another, using her busy schedule as a shield against guilt. "I know I should visit more," Keisha would say during their brief phone calls, "but these boys keep me running, and David's been working overtime." As Martha and Willie sat down to their Sunday dinner, the empty chairs around their table spoke volumes. Martha had cooked enough food for 8 people, as if her love alone could summon their children home. Willie reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Remember when they were little?" Martha said softly, her eyes distant with memory. "Marcus would climb into your lap right after dinner, and Denise would insist on helping me with the dishes. Jerome would play his little guitar in the corner, and Keisha would fall asleep right here at the table. Willie squeezed her hand. They were good children, Martha. We raised them right. They just got caught up in their own lives. But Martha's heart ached with more than nostalgia. Last month, Willie had fallen in the backyard while trying to fix a loose board on their back porch. He'd lain there for 20 minutes before she found him, his face pale with pain, his ankle twisted at an unnatural angle. The emergency room visit had cost them nearly $800 after insurance, money they didn't have. When Martha had called Marcus, hoping he might help with the bill, he'd promised to see what he could do, but never followed through. "Maybe I should try calling them again," Martha suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Willie shook his head slowly. "Baby, we raised them to be independent. We can't keep chasing after grown folks who don't want to be bothered." The truth settled over them like a familiar sadness. Their children had been raised with so much love, so much sacrifice. Martha had worked double shifts as a nurse's aide, while Willie put in 12-hour days pouring concrete and framing houses. They'd gone without new clothes for years so their children could have school supplies and Christmas presents. They'd postponed their own dreams so their babies could go to college, could have opportunities they'd never had. And now, in their golden years, when their bodies were failing and their spirits were weary, they found themselves alone with their memories and their increasingly empty bank account. The months that followed brought a cascade of challenges that seemed designed to test their resilience. Willie's diabetes worsened, requiring expensive medication and frequent doctor visits. Martha's arthritis flared up so badly some mornings that she could barely get out of bed. Their old house, which had sheltered their family for decades, began showing its age in ways they couldn't afford to fix. The roof leaked during the spring rains, staining the ceiling in their bedroom. The water heater gave out in July, leaving them with cold showers for 2 weeks, until Willie's pride finally cracked enough to ask Marcus for help. "Dad, I wish I could help," Marcus had said over the phone, his voice distant and distracted. "But Linda's been talking about renovating our kitchen, and with the girls starting college soon, maybe you could apply for some kind of assistance program." Martha had heard every word from where she sat at the kitchen table, watching Willie's shoulders slump with disappointment. Her husband had worked every day of his adult life, had never asked for a handout, had raised 4 successful children who were now too busy for the man who had given them everything. The isolation grew heavier with each passing day. Their neighbors, people they'd known for decades, were dying or moving to assisted living facilities. The young families who moved into the old houses were polite but distant, caught up in their own busy lives. Martha's garden, once her pride and joy, became harder to maintain. Willie's workshop in the garage, where he'd spent countless hours building toys for his children and grandchildren, gathered dust. One particularly difficult evening in October, as Martha struggled to help Willie up the front porch steps after a doctor's appointment, she noticed a sleek black car parked across the street. A well-dressed white man in his 50s sat behind the wheel, occasionally glancing at their house. When she waved, wondering if he might be lost, he quickly drove away. "Probably just someone turning around," Willie said, but Martha felt a strange unease that she couldn't shake. The car appeared again the next day, and the day after that. Sometimes it was the same man, sometimes a different person entirely. Martha began to feel like they were being watched, studied like specimens under a microscope. When she mentioned it to Willie, he dismissed her concerns. "Honey, you're worried about everything these days," he said gently. "Maybe they're just real estate folks, seeing what's going on in the neighborhood." But Martha's instincts, sharpened by years of caring for others, told her something was different. The way these people looked at their house wasn't casual interest. It was calculating, purposeful. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Martha was sorting through a box of old papers in their bedroom closet, looking for Willie's insurance documents for his upcoming doctor's appointment, when her fingers closed around an envelope she'd never seen before. It was yellowed with age, tucked behind a stack of Christmas cards from years past. Her name was written on the front in unfamiliar handwriting, and the return address made her heart skip. Pemberton, Whitfield and Associates, attorneys at law. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The legal language was confusing at first, full of words like beneficiary and trust fund and estate administration. But as she read more carefully, certain phrases began to jump out at her. Substantial inheritance, property holdings, mineral rights, quarterly distributions. "Willie!" she called, her voice shaky with emotion. "Willie, come here right now." Her husband appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." Martha held out the letter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Read this," she whispered. "Read it and tell me I'm not dreaming." Willie took the letter and settled his reading glasses on his nose. As his eyes moved across the page, Martha watched his expression change from confusion to amazement to complete bewilderment. "This can't be right," he said finally. "This says your great-uncle Benjamin left you. Martha, this says he left you over $2 million. They stared at each other in silence, the magnitude of the words hanging between them like something too precious to touch. Martha had barely known her great-uncle Benjamin, her grandmother's mysterious younger brother who had disappeared from family gatherings when she was just a child. Family legend said he'd gone out west, but no one had heard from him in decades. "There's more," Willie continued reading. "Real estate holdings in Colorado, mining claims, something about quarterly payments that have been accumulating for—" He paused, checking his glasses to make sure he was reading correctly. "Martha, this letter is dated 15 years ago." The implications hit them both simultaneously. For 15 years, money had been sitting in an account somewhere, waiting for them. For 15 years, while they'd struggled to make ends meet, while they'd gone without, while they'd watched their children grow distant and their world grow smaller, a fortune had been collecting dust in some lawyer's office. "Why didn't we get this letter?" Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Willie examined the envelope more closely. "Look at this address," he said. "This was sent to 412 Magnolia Street. We're 412 Magnolia Drive. Looks like it got delivered to the wrong house and somehow ended up mixed in with our stuff years ago." They called the law firm immediately, Martha's hands shaking so badly that Willie had to dial the numbers for her. The receptionist transferred them to a senior partner, Mr. Pemberton himself, whose voice carried the kind of respectful warmth reserved for very wealthy clients. "Mrs. Washington," he said, "we've been trying to locate you for over a decade. Your great-uncle Benjamin was quite successful in Colorado, mining, real estate, various investments. He was also quite specific that his wealth should go to the family members who needed it most, particularly his great-niece Martha, whom he remembered as a kind and hard-working young woman." The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls and meetings. Mr. Pemberton explained that Benjamin Washington had indeed struck it rich in Colorado, but he'd never forgotten his roots or his family. His will had been very specific. His considerable fortune was to be held in trust for Martha Washington of Atlanta, Georgia, with quarterly payments to begin immediately upon her location. The accumulated funds, including interest and investment growth, Mr. Pemberton explained during their meeting in his downtown office, total approximately $3.7 million. Additionally, there are several properties in Colorado, a home in Denver, and ongoing mineral rights that generate substantial quarterly income. Martha and Willie sat in the lawyer's plush office, overwhelmed by the surreal nature of it all. Just a week ago, they'd been counting pennies for groceries. Now, they were being told they were millionaires. "There's something else," Mr. Pemberton continued. "Your great-uncle was very specific about one condition. He wanted to ensure that his wealth went to someone who understood the value of hard work and family loyalty, someone who hadn't been corrupted by easy money or forgotten where they came from. As the reality of their new situation began to sink in, Martha and Willie made a pact. They would be careful about who they told, and they would be even more careful about how they handled this blessing. They'd lived long enough to know that money changed people, and they'd raised their children to be independent for a reason. "We'll fix up the house first," Martha decided. "Make it comfortable and safe. Then we'll see what happens." They started small. Willie hired a contractor to fix the roof and install a new water heater. Martha bought a few new dresses and had the old furniture reupholstered instead of replaced. They were careful not to make sudden, dramatic changes that would raise questions in the neighborhood. But word travels fast in small communities, especially when contractors are working on houses and new cars appear in driveways. Within 2 months, Martha and Willie had traded Willie's 15-year-old pickup truck for a modest but reliable sedan, and their home had been transformed from a house needing constant repairs to a comfortable, well-maintained refuge. It was Keisha who called first, her voice unusually bright and attentive. "Mom, I was driving through the neighborhood the other day, and I noticed you had some work done on the house," she said. "It looks wonderful. I hope everything's okay. I hope you didn't have to go into debt or anything for repairs." Martha smiled to herself, hearing the curiosity hidden beneath her daughter's concern. "We're managing just fine, baby. Your daddy and I have been blessed with a little good fortune." "Good fortune?" Keisha's voice perked up immediately. "What kind of good fortune?" "Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. How are my grandbabies?" But Keisha wasn't easily distracted. "Mom, you know I worry about you and Dad. If you've come into some money somehow, I just want to make sure you're being careful. There are a lot of scammers out there targeting elderly people." Within a week, Marcus called with similar concerns, his accountant's mind immediately calculating the cost of the improvements he'd noticed during a rare drive through his parents' neighborhood. "Dad, I hope you didn't take out a reverse mortgage or anything," he said. "Those things can be really dangerous for people on fixed incomes." When Willie assured him that they hadn't borrowed any money, Marcus pressed further. "Well, where did the money come from then? Did you win something? Hit the lottery?" "Son, your mother and I are doing just fine. We've got everything we need and then some." Jerome called from Los Angeles 3 days later, his usually scattered attention focused with laser precision on his parents' sudden good fortune. "Pop, I heard from Marcus that you guys have been doing some renovations," he said. "That's so great. I was actually calling because I wanted to come visit. It's been too long, and I miss you and Mom so much." The sudden interest from all 4 children was as transparent as it was predictable. Denise called from Chicago, suggesting she could take some time off to come help them manage their finances. Marcus offered to set up investment accounts and help them with tax planning. Jerome mentioned that he was finally ready to settle down, and wouldn't it be nice if he moved back to Atlanta to be closer to family. Keisha started visiting weekly, bringing the grandchildren and staying for dinner, her eyes constantly surveying the improvements to the house. Martha and Willie watched this sudden surge of attention with a mixture of sadness and bitter amusement. After years of being forgotten and ignored, after birthdays that passed without calls and holidays spent alone, their children were suddenly concerned about their welfare. "It's like they can smell money in the water," Willie said one evening after fielding calls from all 4 children in a single day. Martha nodded, her heart heavy with disappointment. "I keep hoping that maybe this time it's genuine. Maybe they really do miss us and want to spend time with us." But the evidence suggested otherwise. Their children's sudden interest coincided perfectly with their improved circumstances. The grandchildren, who had been too busy for visits, were suddenly eager to spend weekends with Grandma and Grandpa. The adult children, who had been too stressed and distracted for phone calls, were now checking in daily. The transformation was most obvious in Marcus, who went from distant and dismissive to solicitous and involved almost overnight. He began stopping by unannounced, ostensibly to check on their well-being, but actually to catalogue every improvement, every new purchase, every sign of their changed circumstances. "Dad, I've been thinking," he said during one of these visits, settling into Willie's chair as if he belonged there. "You and Mom are getting older and managing money can be complicated. Why don't you let me help you set up some investment accounts? I could handle everything for you." Willie, who had managed his family's finances for over 50 years, bristled at the suggestion. "Son, we've been taking care of our money since before you were born. We're doing just fine. But Dad, this is different now. If you've come into some real money, you need professional management. You could lose everything if you're not careful." The conversation that followed was painful in its revelation of how little Marcus thought of his parents' intelligence and capability. He spoke to them as if they were children, incapable of understanding basic financial concepts, in need of his guidance and control. Denise was subtler, but no less calculating. During her first visit home in over a year, she spent hours reminiscing about her childhood, telling stories about family traditions and expressing regret about how distant she'd become. "I've been thinking about moving back to Atlanta," she said over Sunday dinner. "Chicago is so cold and impersonal. I miss being close to family, miss being part of something real." But her interest in family closeness seemed directly proportional to her curiosity about their financial situation. She asked careful questions about their good fortune, offered to help them find proper legal representation, and suggested that they might want to consider estate planning to make sure their assets were protected. Jerome's approach was the most direct and least sophisticated. During a surprise visit home, the first in 3 years, he was full of schemes and investment opportunities that would help them grow their money. "Pop, I've got this connection in the music industry," he said, his eyes bright with opportunistic enthusiasm. "If you could invest maybe 50 or 100,000, I could guarantee returns that would make your head spin." When Willie politely declined, Jerome's disappointment was obvious. He spent the rest of his visit alternating between lavish praise for his parents' wisdom and barely concealed frustration at their refusal to fund his dreams. Keisha's strategy was emotional manipulation wrapped in family obligation. She brought the grandchildren over frequently, making sure Martha and Willie fell in love with their great-grandchildren all over again, then casually mentioned the financial struggles she and her husband faced. "The boys need so much for school," she'd say, watching her parents dote on the children. "And David's been talking about starting his own business, but we just don't have the capital." She never asked directly, but her meaning was clear. Family helped family. Grandparents who loved their grandchildren would want to invest in their future. As the weeks passed, Martha and Willie found themselves under constant pressure from their children. Every conversation became an opportunity for subtle manipulation. Every visit included hints about financial assistance or investment opportunities. Their children's sudden attention felt suffocating rather than loving, calculated rather than genuine. The final straw came during Thanksgiving dinner, the first time all 4 children had been home together in over 5 years. Martha had spent days preparing their traditional feast, hoping that their family gathering might recapture some of the warmth and closeness they'd once shared. Instead, the dinner became a competition among the siblings for their parents' financial favor. Marcus dominated the conversation with talk about investment strategies and tax shelters. Denise offered to introduce them to her lawyer friends, who specialized in estate planning. Jerome pitched business opportunity after business opportunity. Keisha made increasingly pointed comments about the costs of raising children and maintaining a household. Finally, Willie set down his fork and looked around the table at his 4 children. "That's enough," he said quietly, but his voice carried the weight of decades of disappointment. All of you. That's enough. The table fell silent. Martha reached over and took his hand, her heart breaking for the man who had worked so hard to give these people everything they'd ever wanted. Your mother and I have been sitting here listening to all of you for weeks now, Willie continued, his voice steady but filled with sadness. And not one of you, not one, has asked how we're doing, how we're feeling, whether we're happy or healthy or lonely. Marcus started to protest. Dad, that's not fair. You've been circling like vultures, Willie interrupted, his voice growing stronger. For months, years, we didn't hear from any of you unless you needed something. Your mother cooked Sunday dinner every week, hoping somebody might show up. She kept your rooms exactly the way you left them, thinking maybe you'd come home for a visit. We went to the emergency room alone. We fixed what we could and lived with what we couldn't afford to fix, and none of you cared enough to check on us. Martha felt tears running down her cheeks, but she didn't try to stop them. These were words that needed to be said, truths that had been buried under politeness and false hope for too long. But now, Willie continued, now that you think we might have something you want, suddenly we're important to you. Suddenly you want to spend time with us, help us, invest in us. Where were you when we needed help? Where were you when your mother fell in the garden and sprained her wrist? Where were you when I couldn't afford my medication? Denise had the grace to look ashamed. Dad, we didn't know things were that bad. You didn't know because you didn't ask, Martha said softly, finding her voice. You didn't know because you were too busy with your own lives to notice that your parents were struggling. Jerome, who had never been good at reading emotional situations, made the mistake of trying to lighten the mood. Come on, y'all, we're family. Family helps each other out. If Mom and Dad have been blessed with some good fortune, why can't we all benefit from it? The words hung in the air like a confession. Willie stood up slowly, his dignity intact despite his disappointment. Family does help each other, he said. But what we've learned these past few months is that we raised 4 children, and somewhere along the way, they stopped being our family and started being strangers who share our name. He walked to the living room and returned with a manila folder. Martha knew what it contained: bank statements, investment summaries, legal documents that proved the extent of their inheritance. Willie set the folder on the table and opened it, spreading the papers out so all 4 children could see. Their eyes widened as they took in the numbers, the scope of their parents' wealth. Martha watched their faces change as they realized this wasn't a small windfall or a modest improvement in circumstances. This was life-changing money. Your great-uncle Benjamin left your mother a considerable inheritance, Willie said. More money than we ever dreamed of having, enough to take care of us for the rest of our lives, enough to help our children and grandchildren, enough to make a real difference in this world. The silence around the table was deafening. Martha could practically see the calculations happening in her children's minds, the plans being formed, the justifications being prepared. But here's the thing, Willie continued. Uncle Benjamin's will had a condition. The money was supposed to go to someone who understood the value of hard work and family loyalty. Someone who hadn't been corrupted by greed or forgotten where they came from. He closed the folder and looked at each of his children in turn. We've been watching you these past months, watching how you reacted to our good fortune, and we've learned something important. Money doesn't reveal people's true character. It just makes that character more obvious. Martha stood up and walked to stand beside her husband. We've decided to honor Uncle Benjamin's intentions, she said. The money will go to people who understand what family really means. Marcus leaned forward, panic creeping into his voice. What are you saying? We're your children. We're your family. Are you? Willie asked quietly. When's the last time any of you called just to see how we were doing? When's the last time you visited without wanting something? When's the last time you treated us like people instead of obligations? The questions hung in the air, unanswered because they were unanswerable. The truth was evident in their children's silence, in their inability to defend themselves without sounding even more selfish. Martha walked to the kitchen window and looked out at her garden, where she'd spent so many lonely afternoons tending flowers that no one ever came to see. "We've made our decision," she said softly. "The bulk of the inheritance will go to establish a foundation for elderly people who need support, people whose families have forgotten them. The rest will go to the grandchildren's education funds, managed by trustees who will ensure the money is used responsibly." "You can't be serious," Denise said, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. "You're going to give away millions of dollars to strangers instead of your own children." Willie smiled sadly. "We're giving it to family, sweetheart. Just not the family we thought we had." The explosion of protests, accusations, and anger that followed was predictable, but still heartbreaking. Their children accused them of being manipulative, of testing them unfairly, of being ungrateful for the attention and concern they'd finally received. They threatened legal action, emotional blackmail, anything they could think of to change their parents' minds. But Martha and Willie had made their decision based on months of observation and years of disappointment. They had seen their children's true priorities, and those priorities didn't include genuine love or respect for their parents. As their children stormed out one by one, making threats and promises in equal measure, Martha and Willie found themselves alone at their dinner table once again. The house felt empty, but this time it was a clean emptiness, like the feeling after a storm has passed. "Do you think we did the right thing? Martha asked, her voice exhausted but peaceful. Willie reached across the table and took her hand, just as he had on so many Sunday dinners when it was just the two of them. "I think Uncle Benjamin would be proud," he said. "I think we honored his memory and protected his legacy." In the months that followed, their children's true character continued to reveal itself. Marcus threatened legal action, but was told by multiple attorneys that his parents were well within their rights to dispose of their assets as they saw fit. Denise tried emotional manipulation, sending lengthy letters about family bonds and forgiveness, but never once acknowledging her years of neglect. Jerome disappeared back to Los Angeles, angry and bitter that his dreams would have to be funded by his own efforts. Geisha made a few half-hearted attempts to reconcile, but when it became clear that no money would be forthcoming, her visits stopped entirely. Martha and Willie used their inheritance wisely and purposefully. They established the Benjamin Washington Foundation for Elder Care, which provided support for elderly people who had been abandoned by their families. They helped fund a community center in their neighborhood where seniors could gather for meals and companionship. They quietly helped neighbors with medical bills and home repairs, always anonymously, always with dignity. Most importantly, they found a new family among the people they helped and the volunteers who worked with their foundation. They discovered that family wasn't just about blood relationships. It was about people who showed up, who cared, who valued them as human beings rather than potential sources of benefit. Their house on Magnolia Street became a gathering place for people who understood the value of genuine relationships. Sunday dinners were filled with laughter and conversation, with people who came because they wanted to be there, not because they hoped to gain something. On a warm spring evening 2 years later, as Martha and Willie sat on their newly renovated front porch, watching the sunset, Martha reflected on the journey that had brought them to this place. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, "giving up the money instead of just giving it to them anyway?" Willie was quiet for a long moment, watching a young family walk by on the sidewalk, the parents pushing a stroller while their toddler ran ahead, laughing with pure joy. "I regret that we failed somewhere along the way," he said finally. "I regret that 4 children who were raised with so much love turned into adults who could only see us as sources of benefit rather than people worthy of love and respect. He turned to look at his wife, the woman who had stood beside him through decades of struggle and joy, loss and hope. "But I don't regret choosing dignity over manipulation, respect over greed. Uncle Benjamin left us that money because he trusted us to use it wisely, and I believe we have." Martha nodded, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in years. They had learned one of life's hardest lessons, that sometimes love means saying no, that sometimes family means choosing the people who choose you back, and that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the respect and genuine affection of people who value you for who you are, not what you can provide. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Martha and Willie Washington sat together on their front porch, surrounded by the true riches of a life well lived. Dignity, purpose, and the knowledge that they had remained true to their values, even when it cost them everything they thought they wanted. In the end, they had gained something far more valuable than their children's false attention. They had gained peace, self-respect, and a legacy that would help others long after they were gone. The inheritance had revealed the truth about their children's hearts, but it had also revealed the strength of their own. In choosing to honor Uncle Benjamin's values over their children's greed, they had written the final chapter of their love story, not with bitterness or regret, but with the quiet satisfaction of people who had faced a difficult choice and chosen correctly, no matter the cost.